Hello, everybody. Hello. Today we have Robert King on, who is the rising star of the now fallen Cape Independence Movement, which has gone into recovery, pending future changes of plans. It's been a hard month for those who were hoping for some kind of change at the ballot box, but life goes on. We figure something out. I think just to sort of give anyone who's listening in a little heads up of what we're going to be chatting about tonight. There's a couple of items. Number one, off the top of it, some news from the Afrikaner nationalist world is that they've formed something called the Afrikaner Foundation. So this is a organization designed for fundraising and diplomatic influence overseas. Now, previously they had these things like Afriforum Wereldwijd and so on. And the problem with this is the diaspora wasn't clued into a specific organization that had ties into the whole umbrella movement of the solidarity movement, because at the moment they're trying to reform the movement as a federal system. So all of the different organizations, whether they're SAI representing the farmers, or Afriforum representing neighborhood watches, civil rights, or Solidarity, the union, which represents Afrikaans workers, they have all of these different associated organizations that they're trying to bring in under this grand umbrella that they can use to sort of gradually organize more centrally. But they have a particular culture over there, and it's very federated. It's probably a good word. There's a culture of avoiding too much centralization. But with that in mind, the Afrikaner Foundation has a much more narrow focus, so it's foreign influence. Now, there are some programs that they're having a look at the moment, that one of which I'm hopefully going to be involved in, but I can't talk about that right now. Maybe in a couple of months' time I can deliver some news, but at the moment I'm just sort of picking away at my little problem in that corner. At the moment, the leadership are sitting in America. They're going to the National Conservative Conference, or the NatCon, and they're going to be telling the Americans what we're all up to down south, and how the Afrikaners are fighting the evil woke empire, which in a sense we are. But I think the thing is, for Americans, it's what's being done here, depending on their focus, sometimes looks a bit unsexy. Because while the results are sort of like, oh wow, you built your own university, oh wow, you've got your own town outside of the grips of black nationalist power, they sort of listen to the process and go, yeah, okay. And you don't sound very based when you talk about politics. You sound very sort of calm and mainstream and respectable and all that. And I think that's actually good. I think one of the things that I'm noticing now, particularly if you go to Europe, you speak to people in Europe, what they expect from an Afrikaner nationalist movement is like fire-breathing, national front, all of that kind of stuff. And the reality is, you get these sort of like quite buttoned down, sort of libertarian, conservative sort of characters. I think even in South Africa, we've got kind of an overhyped image of Afrikaner nationalism. So what they're doing overseas is trying to present themselves, put their best face forward overseas, so people don't get the wrong idea. Because they represent the whole of the Afrikaner people almost. With over 500,000 members for the movement as a whole, they represent, if seen as households, much more than that, easily over 1 million Afrikaners. And this means that they are an emerging parallel government system. And with that in mind, I think that a lot of people should pay attention to their particular mode of thinking. I mean, I have a guy who's an expert on the intellectual history behind this, who I'd love to get on if he'd be willing to. Because at the moment he's trying to keep a very low profile and won't put his real name out there and all of that kind of stuff, because the internet can attract some negative attention. But very, very bright young man. I will ring his bell shortly, and if we can get him on next week, it'll be really great, and we can have a nice deep dive into the intellectual history of the Afrikaner movement. But that news aside, we have a rather urgent, not urgent, but overdue reflection on our failures in the Cape Independence movement. I think a lot of us looked forward to a sizable enough victory to cause the DA to reevaluate their position in the province and hopefully to push them into a coalition. But this didn't come to pass. In fact, the referendum party, who led the charge, failed incredibly dismally, whether it's due to brand recognition or not. Some positive remarks would be that the Vryheidsfront, while they shrunk a couple of points down here, this was the only province where they really retained more or less the same level of their votes, whereas elsewhere in the country they dropped by about 30 points, and all of the votes that they won last electoral cycle went back to the DA. So a lot of the analysis from inside the party is sort of saying, well, the only reason the Western Cape didn't collapse for the Vryheidsfront is that they stood up for Cape independence. And I think there's some merit in that. But that said, I think we should be a bit circumspect and not try and congratulate ourselves too much. What do you think, Robert King?
So look, I think there's two main factors for the referendum party that came into play. So you first got the provincial and the national picture, which in hindsight wasn't really playing in our favour, especially compared with 2019. And then you have the issue of being a new political party, having 7 months to establish a brand that people recognise, and that was a far bigger challenge than I think we might have expected at first. So to take that first point, if you look at 2019, especially from a lot of minority communities, there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the DA. And people were looking for different political options. So that's why you saw that big move of support from the DA to parties like the Freedom Front. And at the time, there was even people talking about going over to COPE and some of these other parties. And we saw the Cape Independence Party in that environment got about 10,000 votes nearly. Then as time's gone on, the DA has, at least from an optics point of view, shifted somewhat more to the right or to the centre ground. And this has brought back a lot of those more right-leaning voters back into the fray of the DA. And then also, once you had the multi-party charter set up, it had the consequence of really rallying a lot of people behind the DA. So they at least gave this impression that they had a plan on saving the country, even though we all know they never believed it would actually succeed. But it was appealing enough to a lot of people to give one last chance of saving South Africa. And unfortunately, it was a very difficult thing to fight back against. And also we were playing on social media a lot. And we had quite a substantial game there, producing a lot of good content. But if you compare our social media budget in that last week, I think you can look at it on Facebook's advertising page. It was about 50,000 rands we probably spent, or somewhere in that range. But the DA ended up spending about 2 million rands on Facebook advertising in just the last week of the campaign. So it's a massively difficult scale to combat against there.
Jeepers. I mean, you're making me think of sort of a friend of mine who works in PR and with a lot of the parties, who said that, was it Rise Mzansi? Yeah, Rise Mzansi managed to print enough posters right at the start of the campaign, because they registered very late. They printed enough posters early in the campaign that the costs for that alone would have run into a couple of millions. And the consequences of that observation are that they must, because they hadn't declared any donations yet, the consequences of that observation are that they took donations on board before they registered as a political contestant, so that they didn't have to declare them. And you can see that they'd already been campaigning beforehand. I still think about that project and Roger Jardine's project. Do you remember this? The CSA or whatever they were called.
Case off later.
Yeah, and they offer the DA R1 billion to say, like, can I be the presidential candidate for the MPC? What do you think you're doing? Didn't even register. The party didn't even register. And I mean, I look at this and I think the people with money in this country, the dumb nonsense that they back to save the country. I remember looking at my favorite example.
You had more faith in the MPC than the DA did.
Yeah, it's really funny. I think also there was the angle of saying the angle in there where they were thinking, well, the DA are a bit too white, so if we get someone else in who represents us who's not white, then we can offer the people something. And what they really want is more free stuff and more BEE, which is what Roger Jardine pushed. I mean, his party was a combination of like extremely wealthy tenderpreneurs and rabid sort of like deep old communists. It was such a bizarre combination, and I looked at that and I thought it's the most comical thing ever. A lot of people wasted money on that election, and I mean, I think you hear this a lot from the black nationalist side of the commentating sphere, is that the DA actually lost votes. They got fewer votes in absolute terms than they did last time. Fewer people are showing up to support them. And this is remarkable. I mean, Ernst Ritz made that wonderful observation. I mentioned this last podcast as well. He made that observation, the parties that were selling, South Africanism and, we are one and rainbowism and all that, they actually lost votes. And he included the Vryheidsfront in this, who pivoted under Peter Groenewald to being, the same old, this very old-fashioned Afrikaner idea where you say, well, everybody in this country is a minority. And you sort of think, well, yes and no. They're saying, well, black's not real. It's really, Zulu, Xhosa, Venda, whatever. But it doesn't really work out that way, and in practice, it causes problems because the branches that sign up people who aren't Afrikaans then have to switch to English as a medium, and the party starts losing its identity. It's a Christian conservative Afrikaner party, and in spirit, and I think that the failure to recognize that certainly kind of lost them their edge to some extent over the past few years. But that's by the by. I was sort of shocked to find that there was a lot of disagreement in the party between the North and the South whether Cape independence was worthy of support. It would have seemed a no-brainer to me in terms of this is a party that supports self-determination. Here's your first opportunity to get behind a self-determination movement. You'd think, okay, wonderful. We don't have to get criticized by the far right anymore. By the far right, I mean the guys who are a little bit sort of loony. Let's call them the loony right, who are a bit sort of unhinged and can't get their act together, bitter enders and so on. There was a sort of almost half-hearted sort of attitude from a certain faction in the North in the party. But I mean, at the end of the day, the DA sort of played a game where they made everyone else who joined the MPC utterly irrelevant, because they said, well, a vote for any of these parties is a vote for any of these parties. It's now one category, which sort of makes anyone who's got the least chance of winning disposable. It puts the DA right up front. So that becomes the main selling point, is the DA again, and everyone else takes a back seat. It's a simple logic. I do sort of think, how much have you been, I mean, you know the inside of the movement fairly well. The infighting that went down in the months leading up to the election was very frustrating. I mean, look, from the inside, it's nothing new. But I think most of the people on the outside will not have seen quite how disastrous the splits within the movement were.
Yeah, look, it's I'm not entirely sure how big of a role that played in the entire affair. Look, if you look at, for example, Cape Exit, we did get the opportunity to reach out to their database. I think the problem is it was just very evident that people are far more loyal to the DA than they're loyal to the Cape Exit organisation, which was a bit of a challenge for us. But look, at the end of the day, if you consider, for example, the Cape Independence Party, unfortunately, we weren't really able to reach an accommodation there before the election. But at the same time, there's no guarantee that they would have done better in this election than previous ones, just because they weren't able to qualify for the ballot and we were able to qualify for the ballot. So I think there were lots of other factors in play rather than that one in particular. I think we were able to, with the referendum party, bring a lot of talented people, pragmatic people from a lot of different backgrounds on board. And if there's one good thing that came from the election, is that we have now got a strong team of volunteers behind the referendum party, which we can use to build on. But yes, it's going to be a long and difficult road ahead. I mean, the next big test that any political party is now going to get is 2026.
Yeah, that's true. I do think that by this time, the coalition's faults and favorabilities will be very evident by then. The DA's capacity to actually leverage any power in the coalition will be apparent by then. I think, look, at the moment, they are starting to get a few little gains. So there's, they're cutting, funding to MPs' houses and so on. It's like, it's nice stuff where you tidy up a few budgetary items, I think, however, that there are extraordinary limits on what they can do. Particularly, one of my favorite examples of seeing a DA ministry get neutered was John Steenhuisen being given agriculture and then land being spun off to the PAC. So they need to work together to get any kind of policy change happening on land reform. And this is the funny part, is that the PAC wouldn't accept any kind of approach from the DA. I can't imagine under any circumstances. I mean, this is a party that couldn't agree on who the leader of the party was for nearly a decade. There had two people claiming to be official leader for a long time. And, fringe hyper-genocidal black nationalist group, split off from the ANC in protest of the ANC allowing any minorities into the party. This is their foundation myth. So it's a group that is unlikely to work together, but at the same time, they cannot work without the alignment to the agricultural policy. And the land reform, the organization that does land reform in this country, is a terribly, terribly run bureaucracy where it takes absolute bloody ages for them to process anything. So that's the one thing that should worry everyone, is that expropriation bill is still sitting on President Ramaphosa's desk. That would certainly streamline the PAC's job for them. And then there's another land reform bill that's sort of meandering its way through Parliament, which is one that would change the criteria of evidence in land courts. So the land courts bill is one that sort of scares me a little bit, because one of the things it allows them to do is it puts oral testimony, what do they call it? Like oral tradition as equal to actual material evidence, which in practice means that hearsay and I just think it's, and like random opinion, is now equal to actual title deeds in terms of evidence in the courts if it gets passed. It's a really scary thing, because it means that any comer could just sort of claim your property, and your evidence is just sort of like, even if it's cast iron, is as nothing. So
I mean, that is literally hearsay. You're telling the court that you heard from your ancestors, essentially, that you own the land, or that it's your land by birthright.
Right. It's complete bananas time. So I don't know what they're going to do about that. Also, interestingly enough, Sakalik has got a couple of court cases against the government, and I hear that one of them is going to be one of the respondents is now going to be a DA minister. So that's going to be fun. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle the press on that. I think what we're going to have to look forward to, though, is the possibility of everyone having decided it's over, it'll never happen forever. And I mean, this is a real possibility. I mean, it's a real defeat, and you can feel it in the air. You really can feel it. No one's even thinking about it. It's dead and buried. So from my perspective, I sort of thought about this, and I think, what was missing was the connective tissue, actual community activism. So in every party, there's a network of organizations, whether they're churches or charities or any kind of institution, whether they're or unions, just literally anything. There are organizations that are established, have a social network that they tap into, and can lend their support as a sort of whole group to the party. And that's true for the DA, it's true for the IFP, it's true for the ANC, but it's not true for the Cape Independence movement at all. It's, I think it's like a millimeter deep, this movement, in terms of its social penetration. And it did have broad appeal at a certain stage. Now, I trust those opinion polls that came out, those really impressive ones where they said like 65% support and all that. I do trust that exists. Like, everyone says, yeah, but how strong is that feeling? You've got to remember, it's sort of like it'll be a great idea. And then that's the end of the story. What are you going to do about it? Oh, I don't know. Maybe someone will figure it out. So for most people, it's like, well, what is the most real threat? The real threat is the ANC. This is a tangible thing. You can poke them. You can see them on TV. They're real people. Whereas something like, Cape Independence, people are like, well, yeah, but how do you do that? How does that work? And you can tell them 100 different ways on, social media and articles in the newspapers and all that. But people are going to go, So half of them are going to forget it after they read it, and the rest are not even reading it in the first place. So it becomes something that, unless you have that sort of natural connective tissue in the communities, you're really going to struggle to get it going. And I think, we've got 2 years now. We get 2 years to start doing that. And I think my recommendation, and I wrote an article on this for the Cape Independent, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where I said, okay, well, what's the point now? The point now is to go and say, well, what's going on in my community that I can fix that nobody's fixing? Not the DA, nobody. And is there somebody else who's working on that problem, or indeed any other problem? And I mean, okay, I live in Drakenstein. I know someone who's working on a challenge to the crooked waste to energy deal that they've got going here. I've got somebody who's working on trying to prevent illegal developments that are happening under the municipality's watch, struggling really, because the rumor is that the council is using the illegal development as a foothold to change the zoning regulation so that they can pave over the farmland and do a whole bunch of cluster housing developments, which ruin my bloody day, because I'm in one of these lucky positions where I'm a walking distance from like farmland and open clear skies and mountains and stuff, and now I'm just someone in a townhouse, and then I'm soon going to be just someone in a shoddy townhouse. So there's a lot of these little things. There's activism around, the homeless shelter that the DA has rented out to local businesses so that they don't have anywhere to put the vagrants that they now cannot clear out because they have nowhere to put them. There are so many of these little problems where there's bound to be someone in your community working on them. And I think, if you're into Cape Independence, check it out. I mean, speak to them. Ask them, did you support Cape Independence as well? They're probably going to say yes. There are a lot of people who give a damn in the society. As long as they're not, lefties, they're probably going to say yes. And I think the solution here is really just to build local pressure. this is something we absolutely failed at. We really were way too confident. I think actually those opinion polls were the worst thing that happened to us because it gave us way more confidence than we actually deserve to have.
No, I think that there's definitely some truth there to building that that local structure network of supporters from different backgrounds. And look, I did that to a limited degree in Rebecca Castile, and even though it was very limited, you can see that we got probably one of our best vote shares in Rebecca Castile relative to other areas, where I did speak to certain influential people in the community who had some sort of reach, and I used networks like that to try and bolster some support. But look, I think going forward, the main thing the CIG at the moment is going to be exploring is this private referendum route, which I think will provide an opportunity to do that, because in many ways it does also take it somewhat outside of the party political space. I think some people are very hesitant to be associated with anything that's too party political because of the possible pushback that it might get. People like to keep their business separate from politics. But I think going forward, that could be a very powerful platform to bolster this from. And then once you've got something like that very tangible that you can use, then I think that can also inadvertently support the party political side going forward, because it gives this brand recognition to Cape Independence. It gives brand recognition to the concept of a referendum. It makes it seem like a far more tangible topic once you've actually voted on it. So I think all those things together, should push in that particular direction.
I see what you're saying, but I mean, go on, Leo.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to that. Also, leading up to the private referendum, it creates, like you said, a tangible idea in people's minds that this is actually something that is approaching, something that is within reach, potentially just in terms of a referendum. One, undoubtedly, that will cause some media storm to some degree. But also, once you have that, it creates this, like you said, helping on the political side. It's almost like a mandate. If you get enough people to vote yes, if you get, let's say, something really substantial, like a couple 100,000 votes, you can almost wield that around like a mallet and basically say that we have this legitimacy around as something that is tangible going forward. And if you want to ignore these people, then okay, but you have to say it now. You can't just say, well, it's just a poll, or no one ever actually talks about it. No one ever, this is not something people care about, or whatever it is. It's like 12th down the priorities. If people have already voted for it, they've expressed this in something that is, you can pin down.
And also when it comes to the local or the regional politics of the Western Cape, it's far more easier to ignore something when you can present other options to people. So up until now, we've had the DA saying, well, we've got the MPC, we've got the 2024 elections. Now they're saying, well, we've got the GNU, let's see how that goes. Once all those options fall by the wayside and there's nothing left, if people are coming to you with a solution, and the DA is no longer in a position where they can really offer something to people that's tangible, or you get to the point where people have just become so disheartened by the fact that they've, everything that the DA has told them will happen hasn't happened, then, that puts your position, that leverage, in a far stronger position.
Yeah, look, I hear you, but I have a very big criticism of this. So do you remember that petition to get Phil Craig deported?
Yeah.
You remember how many people signed that thing?
I think it was about 30,000.
Yeah, it's a significant number compared to, say, the number of people who signed to register the party, right?
Of course, but I mean, look, it comes from all across South Africa.
That's correct. So this is the thing: is how are you going to register and filter these people out? Now, I understand that you guys are talking to Michael Atkins, who I'm not going to doubt his credentials. He's the guy when it comes to electoral security and all that. But I have a strong suspicion that the people who want this are probably not going to be as mobilized as we'd like. And the people who really hate it might be more mobilized than you think. And the gamble that you're making, it's a gamble that's being made on a gesture that if you win it can end up doing nothing. But if you lose it, can end up killing you forever. So for me, it feels like the gamble is wrong. And I feel like Phil Craig is making an error here. But I can't, he's committed, and his perspective on this matter is, well, okay, go build your own vehicle. And this is the same approach that, look, he's more liberal in this respect than, say, Jack Miller is, who feels that, other vehicles are an affront to the movement, and that everything should be under the Cape Independence Party, which I think, I understand why he's doing that, but it doesn't help anyone. And the thing is, Jack Miller is right. He's right in the sense that having one vehicle, at least at the electoral, for electoral purposes, is a good thing. And he's got the recognizable brand. Whereas the referendum party, most people go like, well, what's that? You have to be like someone who's, very big on Cape independence and following the news to actually vote on that. How many people really
even know what the referendum is for?
Exactly. So I think the inability to get on the ballot was, look, Jack Miller believes that there's a conspiracy against him. I think it might have been just the usual obstreperous behavior by the IEC, who are a bunch of morons for the most part.
I have to disagree. Look, I've seen the court documents. They were one of the few parties. I think they were one of maybe a couple parties that reported this issue. 100 parties were able to get on the ballot. They're claiming that there was this issue. I think the court, when they ruled on this matter, I think they laid the blame with the CIP for not being able to get on.
That's correct. Yeah. So but all of that stuff behind us, the one thing that I think is crucial is that, look, he has the recognizable brand. Even someone who is completely illiterate, not completely illiterate, they have to be able to read words, but someone who can go, okay, I want Cape independence. I don't know anything about what's going on, but I want that. They're going to vote for something called the Cape Independence Party, and they're going to look for it on the ballot. But if they don't find it, what percentage of the sort of general support for the idea will know that there's something called the Referendum Party, or know that the Vryheidsfront Plus supports it? It's one of those difficult things, because if you don't have deep community penetration, you're sitting there, because we're all familiar with it. We think we're obvious. We think we're legible, but we're not. We're actually less so than we are. You can speak to even newspaper reading white people who will go like, wait, hang on, what's the Referendum Party? You go like, this is, and you need to win the colored vote, who are kind of, a lot of them follow news from the radio. That's got enormous penetration in the colored community. How much penetration did we have in that area? Not as much as we needed. It was, I think this was something where we were far too confident. We're far too self-confident. And I had the gnawing feeling in my gut that it was going to go south, but I didn't expect it was going to go nearly as badly as it did. It was actually an embarrassing defeat. It was a very embarrassing defeat, and I think going forward, there's going to be a lot of grind to get up to where we need to be to even leverage a single ward seat in the coming local elections. That would even that would be considered a major achievement. And to be honest, we don't have a hell of a lot of time considering demographic shifts, right? So there's a sort of sense of urgency combined with an odd sense of impotence that makes it very difficult to look at this kind of thing with a great degree of optimism. I still consider it something that's necessary in order to have any kind of long-term hopes for this part of the world. But because I don't want to have to go down the route of the rest of the country and, wall off the tiny sections that we live in into, Nigerian style wealthy enclaves. I don't like that. I like being able to, walk my kids, out early in the morning, late in the evening. I like not having to always have my house between 7 layers of physical security. I like having some natural beauty to look at that's not festooned with bloody shacks. And it's gradually becoming less and less likely that that's going to be in our future,
Yeah, the proliferation of security estates in the Western Cape. I was quite shocked. When I arrived here a couple of years ago, even in Durban, it's not actually as bad as it is in like Durbanville or really anywhere outside of the immediate Cape Town area. It's looking increasingly like Joburg and Joburg suburbs. Yeah.
Miserable, really. I mean, they're doing it even down here. Like they're popping up these sort of wealthy enclave towns like Val de Vie and what have you around Wellington and Paarl. And I look at them and I go, that it's actually fine. You can live in like a really nice house in Paarl, like a historical Cape Dutch house. But no, I mean, the only time that Joburg buys an historic Cape Dutch house is to strip everything identifiable off it and turn it into a shitty low-rent coffee shop that they'll try and flip almost immediately. There's
or build 7-foot tall wall so you can't see it from the street.
You know what? I at least have a little bit of sympathy with that move. But there is a tendency to sort of not give a damn that rubs me the wrong way, because the one thing that we have here that the rest of the country has so little of is we have a sense of history and a sense of place. That makes it feel like home. And people who come down here because they like the idea of the place, but when they encounter it, they don't look after it. There's this, there's this sort of like rootless mentality where not ruthless mentality where it just doesn't matter. And it's can I turn it into money? Can I turn it into money? No. Okay, well then burn it. It doesn't matter. And I don't know. I know that there's a side of this where you can say, well, you can't eat beauty, but you can't live without it either. It's, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too sentimental. That's what it does if your family live in the same place for 350 years. I guess you sort of get a bit attached.
Yeah, I know you've gone soft on us, Rob.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was thinking I wanted to do it occurs to me that when I was doing the I still got one of these, by the way. It just sits here in the pen holder by my desk. But it occurs to me when I was doing like the little thumbnail that you can't. The problem with this flag is that, unlike, say, the American flag or whatever, is you can't turn it upside down to say like, "Oh, we're in distress," So I wanted to do this thing where I you have like a major Cape Independence either upside down or whatever. But then by the time I'd finished designing the layer with the Afrikaner movement in it, it was too big. I couldn't fit it underneath. I was like trying to do like full Craig hanging upside down with like the flag in the background, and his face wasn't visible in the thumbnail if I did that, or else it would go like, to make him big enough, like his head starts disappearing underneath the thumbnail. So I just
whatever you do, don't design the flag as it's burning, because that's just blasphemous.
Sure, I mean, that was so silly. It was so obvious what that ad was doing, and yet everyone like chose to pretend to be outraged. It's
the flag was at the end of the ad. It restored at the end of the ad. People just ignored that.
Yeah, no, but no, it's not about people ignored that. It's everybody saw that advert. Everyone understood what was happening in that. There's not I don't imagine even the biggest retard in the country didn't understand what that advert was doing. I don't think they exist. I don't think that person exists. Only the people who didn't see that advert could possibly have honestly believed the DA was burning the flag. Like,
You haven't
anyone
been
who
on
actually thought,
Twitter long enough.
no, but it's like, I just despair sometimes at how fundamentally dishonest everyone is. There's nothing.
Maybe they watched the first 5 seconds and they got so offended they didn't watch the rest, and then they left it like that.
But I mean, the funny part is the people who got offended first, who started this whole wave of outrage, are the self-same people who think that, this flag is disgusting because it represents the white monopoly capital's sort of continuation of apartheid through other means, So they have this, they have this thing where, the flag in the constitution, bugger it all, we need a new one, we need a Zania with an Azanian flag. And then, someone else disrespects the flag, and all of a sudden it's sacred.
Even Action SA was trying to take advantage of that situation and was attacking the DA for burning the flag. So it wasn't even, Action SA was taking advantage of the situation. They said, "We'll never burn the flag as Action SA."
Action SA are an incredible party. I honestly didn't think that that very specific brand of South African patriot politics would actually manifest in Parliament.
It's what Cope promised to be.
True, and like Cope, they collapsed after one election. So
yeah, no, you know what? Actually, I think we're underestimating them. So they have a lot of some of the DA's talent, like old talented heavyweights. You've got Athol Trollop and Michael Beaumont. They're both serious business. Herman Mashaba's no slouch either. I mean, look, he doesn't have the patience for paperwork, that's for sure. But he does know how to hustle, and he does know how to get funds together, right? And he's palatable to the donor classes, right? They have a base they have some sort of a base in Johannesburg. Their anti-immigrant policies have attracted support from Soweto. And look, they're not tainted by the current government in power. So they can legitimately brand themselves as opposition. We vote for change. We're not in government. We're not messing around with any of this stuff. You can't blame us. Look at what we're doing. And they might actually gain a few points in 26. They might win a few more seats, especially in Joburg. So I think they're being underestimated. They played a smart move, actually staying out of the GNU. I think they did.
Certainly, that depending what happens in Johannesburg at the local level too, if you do see some sort of DA ANC arrangement, maintain itself there, then they are the only real somewhat sane opposition party that will be there in the city. So I think it's a very strong possibility, and I agree. Staying out of the GNU is definitely going to do. It's probably the best move Action SA could have made, because at least they can present themselves as an opposition now rather than get a deputy minister position somewhere at best. I think it's a far better move than the alternative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll commend them for their adherence to their anti-ANC stance. Certain parties have been calling the ANC the spawn of Satan for like 20 years, and then got into bed with him the millisecond they could.
But that's the funny thing. I cannot get over how lockstep everyone was in this. But for me, it's not just the DA that have managed to maintain this sort of communication style where they went, never ever in a million years, never DA, while planning for the DA coalition for 5 years and being in Helen Zilla's brain since 2014. Right? This is 10 years in the making, this thing. And right up until the last minute, they do this thing of anyone who says that we're going to go into the coalition of the ANC is fake news, press ombudsman, get them. And then once it's over, it's actually, this is the best thing that could have happened for South Africa. South Africa is saved. We have saved South Africa. It's over. We've saved it. and the DA can't push us around. The ANC can't push us around anymore. We're in charge now. And immediately they just get shafted and neutered and like put on the sidelines. And I look at all of that mess, and the really disappointing side of it is all of the voters, because the DA supporters, within the space of a week, did exactly the same U-turn as they were instructed to make. They were like, no, they're not going to do a deal with the ANC. What are you talking about? This conspiracy theory nonsense. And then they do a deal with the ANC, and then they go, yeah, that's the best thing. I'm like, do you have any capacity for like any independent thought at all?
Well, I think it's a case that people are desperate to try and find something hopeful. So that does, even if it's a very low chance of success, people are still going to try and grab at that opportunity. And when you've got the media also pushing a narrative that doesn't help, making an alternative case. I mean, the media has also been pushing this GNU will save South Africa. But to just give an anecdote, I think the best example of this is one of our new, I think it's the new Deputy Minister for Public Works, Samantha Graham. You will know that she would constantly tell us on one of these WhatsApp groups that there would be no chance of an ANC-DA coalition. She would respond in all caps to us when we would suggest that was on the table. And she had, probably 100 times we were told it wasn't going to happen. And then suddenly she's appointed to the cabinet. Either she knew about it. Yeah, either she knew about it, or this appointment to the cabinet was a surprise to her too.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really shocking. I mean, it's very obvious that to everyone inside the political circles that the statement of intent was mostly drafted by Helen Zille, and even then it nearly didn't go through. I mean, it nearly failed within those last few minutes, at least according to Helen Zille. It nearly failed in those last few minutes. I think you like to dramatize these things a bit much. I think she plays it. I think she plays it up a bit much. The
incompetence is believable. I have to say, the incompetence surrounding how they might have come to that does sound quite believable.
Well, yeah, it does, because things are a bit cartoonish in South Africa.
Like when you go onto the news and you say, "Oh yeah, well we're happy about our cabinet appointments, but we weren't told that the cabinet was going to be increased rather than reduced." Oh well.
Yeah. Do you remember Helen Zille wrote this book called "Stay Woke, Go Broke"?
Yeah.
Now, I recall her saying that she thought she was ahead of the curve when she wrote that book. And it came out in 2021.
Yeah, I know.
When that's at least 3 years after the sort of peak use of that phrase. And it strikes me as sort of one of those things where, I mean, this is the same year that they, if I recall correctly, that they passed that Western Cape Education Department bill, policy, which sort of added the gender neutral bathrooms and made all of the kids go through critical theory training. Like, remember Fishhook High School, where they herded all the white kids into an auditorium and told them that they're all evil and deserve to die? It was absolute mental. It was a mental show. My favorite part about this is I got a DM from some insider in the party, who because I was saying, well, Beverly Schaefer, what the hell's up with her? And he said, no, actually, you don't understand. She is a conservative woman. Like, she's a really conservative, Christian lady. She just didn't read the policy before she signed it. I'm like, what is going on inside this party? What is happening? Okay. I'm going to pivot now to some Western Cape stuff, because I did a couple of articles today on this. So I have someone who informs me about a lot of these internal things that happen at the local level, who sends me on the daily, will send me updates. Some of them are a bit too small to turn into an article, but every now and again you sort of jam them together and you fill in the gaps using, by doing some research in a few places. The picture that pops out of the DA is they have this extremely rigid culture where, if you like, increasingly so, the more that Helen Zille has been involved, and the more power she's got, because now it's at the stage where she will directly intervene to override local caucuses so that they select her preferred candidate, like over and over and over again. And it's not that she didn't meddle before. I mean, the reason that Memory Boyson, for example, is only being charged with criminal conduct now instead of back in 2011 when the problem was first raised, is because constantly she intervenes to protect these people. In Eleanor Bosby's Memory Boyson, the bane of my town's existence, Conrad Pull, who also kicked up to Parliament. The thing about this is there's also now a program where if you want to get ahead in the party, you have to write this exam, an ideological exam. And they have these political bosses that monitor what's happening in the elected governments in all of these different local areas in order to make sure that they stick to the party's ideology, they stick to all of this kind of stuff. And it just made me think a lot of this kind of tight control, this like really weird ideological control that reminded me a lot of the Soviet Union, because they had this double government system where they had you have this formal government and then you have the party, and the party really runs everything. But in order to make sure the people in the regular government actually do their business, they shadow all of the technical staff with a party member who's like leaning over their shoulder going, "Excuse me, what's that? Are you in line with the presidium on this issue?" And I don't know, it seems a bit, it's too tightly controlled when it comes to like strategy and supply chains and things like that. You get the same sort of people selected in every town, make sure that the same network of sort of local donors and everything are kind of included in the process. And on the other hand, you have, particularly in the city, you have these huge bodies of little gophers who work for them writing policy and what have you, who can slip an entire bill contrary to the party's stated beliefs right under their noses. I laugh, if it didn't make me despair. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, you interesting side point on something on internal party dynamics. I mean, you, Robert King, have been busy with the Reform Party up in the UK recently, because you are a true SOTI, 1 foot on each continent. And I had this take that I heard from Academic Agent, who runs a channel on YouTube, does weekly sort of politics updates and all that. He did. He's had this sort of position that you have two halves of the party that are very different in style. You have Farage and the Young Crew, who have a much more sort of radical and much smoother public communicating style. You understand what people want. And then you have Richard Tice, who's been running the party while Farage is enjoying the sunshine in the countryside, who is very sort of, out of touch and boomerish and, the other side of the real racists. And look how much diversity we've got when you're literally an anti-immigrant party, I mean, how much of that did you see where you were?
Well, look, I've only been here for for a couple of weeks, so I wasn't involved too heavily in the campaign. But look, Tice and Farage have gone back quite a few years now, so they were working together on Leave.eu, so they're quite a powerful duo. And look, I think that every person's going to be different, so they're going to have different managing styles to one another, and I'm sure that there's benefits to Richard Tice that complement some of maybe the downsides Farage has. Look, there's a transition going on in politics. People are still getting used to it, and looking at what reforms come out with in this campaign, I've been quite impressed, especially when it comes to how they've developed their immigration policy. It's probably one of the most radical things that have been proposed in the UK in quite a long time.
Yeah, no, I mean the only trouble you have is that trying to get that last lump of conservative loyalists to drop the party. It was. I was actually disappointed in the old generation in the UK. It's like, what are you actually risking? What are you really risking by ditching the Conservative Party?
It's tribalism. It's like the ANC, people voting for the ANC for, just tribalistic reasons. And look, there were some challenges with the party campaign, mainly because of the media in the last week, because there was a lot of momentum like the first 2 weeks, really rising up in the polls, at one point overtaking the Conservatives in quite a number of polls. And then there was this, made-up hysteria around Farage's comments on Ukraine. Where he made pretty rational comments, which is, I don't really like what Putin's done there. He shouldn't have gone in. We're not even against sending weapons to Ukraine to support them, maintaining their independence. But at the same time, maybe the eastwards expansion of NATO and especially the European Union, which he's been warning about for the last 10 years, maybe that's had some sort of role in this entire equation as well. Just throwing that out there. And then he's, Boris Johnson described him as a Putinista. The media headlines were attacking them. And then there were a number of scandals because there was an issue with the vetting company they used, which turns out it was run by a Tory, ex-Tory peer or Tory donor. There were a few candidates that got through the process, which maybe had some less than ideal past records on social media.
I disagree. Those characters that they had, the guys who came in from Lotus Eaters, they were pretty sound. And, what they said in public was actually not all that controversial.
Well, there were some candidates who came out with some pretty outrageous comments, which, as a political party, you've got to keep that in mind. So there was one who came out where I think he said... I'm not going to repeat it on the stream, but there were a number of alleged Tory candidates that got through the process as well. So there were a number of instances where it's rumoured that the Tory party, high command, sent some people through the process to stand as reform candidates and then disendorse the party. And that did happen in a couple of constituencies, unfortunately. But look, the challenge was...
That is an ANC move if I've ever seen one. Do you guys remember when the ANC tried to destroy the ATM party? Okay, you don't.
I've heard of the story.
No.
Basically, what happened is Jesse Duarte got several thousand ANC members to join the ATM, call for a general meeting, and dissolve the party. And it was actually close. Like, they nearly destroyed the party that way. Absolutely extraordinary tactics. I mean, I mean, we're nothing if not dramatic down here. But it's Speaking of vetting process, it does remind me a bit of the ANC, the DA's recent dramas. Although I'm glad to see that they stood behind Ian Cameron. That was touch and go. I thought they'd can him for that.
No, I think Ian Cameron's position was a lot easier to defend than Ronaldo House's, even when context is taken into consideration. It's far easier to defend what Ian Cameron was doing than Ronaldo.
Yeah, in terms of cancel culture, Ronaldo House is basically like walking into the dodgiest neighborhood in South Africa, waving around your wallet, screaming, I don't have any defense. Here's my wallet. Like
it's kind of like that scene in what was it? It's not Lethal Weapon. Was it Lethal? No, it wasn't Lethal Weapon. What's the one with? No, I can't remember what it was called, but it had Samuel L. Jackson and it had not Mel Gibson. What's the other? What's that guy's name? Bruce. No,
Bruce
the bald one who's in lots of films. The
Bruce
one who's got
Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
No, the old 1990s.
Bruce Willis, was it?
There we go, Bruce Willis. The one where he's made to walk naked in the middle of Harlem with a placard that says "I hate N-words," and but there was no, that whole thing with Ronaldo Ghost. I remember I had a friend who I was sort of I never met this person in person, but for a while they were an informant for understanding the ins and outs of the Nelson Mandela Bay Coalition for me. And the picture I got of Ronaldo Ghost was someone who repeatedly had to be called into the office to explain why he said something on social media. And I asked, like, does he like say like racially edgy stuff or whatever? No, he just like destroys negotiations and things like that by saying things out of turn that are supposed to be kept behind closed doors. Like, he just doesn't have. It took years for them to get him to be disciplined enough and focused enough to just not say dumb stuff on the internet, whether it had like a racial dimension or not. And so it seems to me that they hung on to him for far too long. That was an unnecessary scandal, you know? Absolutely unnecessary.
And it's incredible because unless he only deleted that content very recently, like within the last couple of years, that means someone back then must have archived it, and that's an OG hater. Like they hung on to that for a while. They were waiting for him to get to some level of prominence nationally.
Look, I hate to have to leave you guys, but I've got to get ready to head up to London tomorrow. So it's been great being part of the podcast, and I'll hope to be back soon.
Yeah. No, go ahead. All right. Cheers, man. Thanks for coming on.
Cheers, guys.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I don't understand. It's sad, really, because I mean he's sort of. He is a very sort of PE type of character. There's this very I don't know how to put it. There's this sort of guileless aspect to the rough kind of angler that you'll find in that neck of the woods, hey?
Yeah, I guess it's something that I think we're not really used to in South Africa. Well, maybe we are, but I think people broadly in South Africa aren't really used to that sort of crass Anglo humor where you say things and you don't mean it, and everyone is supposed to understand that you don't really mean it. I think that's lost on a lot of people.
I realized this from like spending time overseas because I finished my last high school years in the UK, and you know, you get used to people actually apprehending subtlety and irony and so on. And then you come back to South Africa and you have to learn again how to make sure that everything you say is crystal clear, unambiguous. There's no possibility of a misunderstanding. And you sort of think when you're speaking to people who you know, they don't speak your first language at all, there's this whole thing where you like make sure, is everything I say simple, clear, unambiguous? You know, and it's not even like the racial issues. It's just like, can I actually get through the day without having to explain myself 6 times? You know, and there's too much of this. And I think, people overseas will find South African communication style extremely frustrating because there's no subtlety here. It's just, you know, you're being smacked with a blunt object. So, and it's just everything that's political is very sensitive. Everything organizational is, you know, trying to cope with extreme heterogeneity. And so we have to like streamline everything we're saying all the time. And we don't think about this. But you've got if you're not used to sort of coping with that that difference, or you haven't noticed it, you'll sit there baffled at why does everybody keep misunderstanding me? And I'm like, because
Yeah. Oh, well, that goes back to the DA ad, right? Clearly, it was a bunch of fluent in English people who were making it because they didn't
there's
get
the
this
kind of
message.
symbolism. Yeah, there's a kind of glibness to the symbolism they use, where they just imagine that they understood. There's a weird thing that they do as well, where I found this to be an extraordinary curiosity. Is that every single political party say they believe in the constitution and they believe in the rule of law. It just should be a different constitution and a different rule of law. Even the DA wants to change the constitution. They have bills in parliament right now that are constitutional reforms, right?
Yep.
And yet one group are the constitutionalists and one group are not. And I look at this and I go, well, you know, there's something funny going on here. I mean, how did you manage to corner that brand when all of you are sort of you're pitching for the same turf?
Yeah, I think it's sort of. I think just in that very specific regard of like everyone sort of seemingly aiming for the same thing, some sort of rule of law or some sort of adherence to the constitution. I think because the idea of South Africa is still somewhat nebulous in its modern sense, right? It's not tied to Afrikaner or white nationalism anymore. It's something that's supposed to be for everyone and for every community. I think a lot of people don't recognize the universality of these institutions that were implemented post-apartheid. So when they look at it, they look at it from the perspective of almost as if it was their group that set it up. So if we, if it's I'm a Zulu person, I look at the Constitution and I would try to interpret it as if it was meant for Zulu people specifically.
Yeah,
I think
I think
it's a lot lost in translation in that regard, I think.
Yeah, no, you have a point. I mean, like, there's I remember a lot of people ragging on Lindiwe's, not Lindiwe Sisulu. I almost called it Lindiwe Zulu, but Lindiwe Zulu struggles to string sentences together, so it can't be her. Lindiwe Sisulu, she sort of came under fire a couple of years ago because she said, you know, what is this constitutionalism? What is this rule of law? This is nonsense. We don't have it. And she was right. She was absolutely right. It's sort of, where is the rule of law? I mean, most politicians are completely above the law, and the law is asymmetrically applied. Wherever it is applied, it's only applied where people can either get away with it or where they want to apply it. So
if at all.
Yeah, and then for the Constitution, it comes down to whoever's interpreting it on the given day. And I mean, there's a whole fantastic book by Koos Malan on this called "There's No Supreme Constitution." Why basically it doesn't matter what you've written down on a piece of paper; it matters what the legal culture that the judges ascribe to is at the time that you're running it through the courts. And increasingly, that's becoming this idea of transformationism. So you got this whole thing of, well, we need to interpret this in the light of the necessity to push more white people out of various institutions and take their stuff. And then that becomes the basic. I mean, you get people who have risen to extremely influential positions, on the JSC and the, president's advisory to the land reform, like Tembeka Ngcuka and Toby, who, I mean, this is a guy who has the goal to publish an article in the Mail and Guardian, and the Mail and Guardian have the goal to bloody publish it, which says, the prophecy of Makanda needs to be fulfilled, like after saying, well, we need to take white people off every piece of fixed property. They can't own anything, and all of their liquid wealth has to be confiscated. So now you've got a bunch of like propertyless, 4 or 5 million propertyless, homeless white people. And then at the end of the article, he said, look, of course, when we say we sweep them into the sea, we don't really mean that, because that would be a call to genocide. So of course we didn't quite mean that, legal asterisk attached.
Yeah, we just take away all their land and we make sure there's nowhere left to live.
It's fine. They just hover 6 inches above the ground, and they don't have to. We don't have a problem. Like, like, who believes this nonsense? I mean,
It's incredible that it gets tolerated by basically every major institution in South Africa. Like you can express that opinion almost completely uncontroversially.
Yeah. Sorry, someone actually asked what bill the DA's introduced for amendments. So the first one is, so this is one that Helen Zille was talking about a couple of years ago. And this is what she thought was going to be one of her big preconditions for going into coalition with the ANC is an independent anti-corruption unit. So it's called, let me just share the screen because, here Adolf and Koller has asked this question. There we go, share. So over here you've got you can see this, so the 21st, but it's kind of a spooky one because what they really want is they want a parliamentary body which is appointed and appointed by parliamentary committees, and then it will be above the president. Like, this is an insane idea in any country. Like in South Africa, it would mean absolute chaos. It seems like a good idea in practice, but if you've read any kind of history, it has the same constitutional structure as the Public Safety Committee in the French Revolutionary government. So it can actually decide. Yeah, so it decides who it gets to prosecute and go after and investigate. And you can, the thing about something of that power is you can absolutely destroy any political career merely by investigating it, right? Unless the only people who won't be destroyed by that are the really extreme ethno-nationalists, right? I mean, there's studies into this, almost all of them in India, funnily enough, where they've shown that, and there's, if you can find the only paper whose authors' names I can remember is a paper called by a pair of guys called Banerjee and Pandey, Pandeh. Banerjee is phonetic, but it's on ethno-linguistic fractionalization. That's the technical term they use, and voting patterns. They looked at Uttar Pradesh in this paper, and they said that okay, well, people who vote for ethno-nationalist parties care far less about issues like corruption and competence than people who are not voting on ethno-nationalist grounds. So if you set up something like this, this anti-corruption body that they want to amend the constitution for, it'll never pass, but let's, fantasize for a minute. You put this thing into place, you've got a situation where they're going to go after pretty much anyone they please. They're untouchable. They can go after the president and ransack his accounts and everything. And they go, oh, okay, great. We're not going to have any more corruption. Not really. You're going to continue to have corruption. Only the people who have the power to dodge this kind of stuff will continue to dodge it. And I mean, Jacob Zuma isn't untouchable just because he's got friends in high places. He's untouchable because he has the cooperation of vast swathes of the civil service, like mid-level guys as well, who just, they're willing to play ball with him. And you've got, judges and bailiffs and so on who are happy to help him out. And he's got a legal team that are willing to waste enormous amounts of time indefinitely. So the lifespan on a truly corrupt, truly popular politician who's really corrupt can be quite long. And in the meantime, their prosecution, should I say, even if it's legitimate, it actually bolsters their popularity. I mean, everyone knows that, looking at Donald Trump, the second he posted that mugshot, his popularity went, leapt. I think because everyone could see it as sort of like, petty nonsense that he was being prosecuted for, compared to some of the ordinary crimes, just the ordinary stuff that every single president gets away with. I mean, why do you think they retire from office multi-millionaires? Why? Yeah,
some of the US presidents are saying, like, go from like 10 million to 250 million in terms of net worth. That was Bill Clinton's time.
Yeah, and I mean the shenanigans they get up to, suppressing their opponents or interfering in the election, and that's both parties in the United States have in living memory rigged elections in many places across the country. This is a normal practice. That it is a country with a great deal of corruption. I mean, even squeaky clean Netherlands, parceling out massive state contracts and monopolies to friends and family of members of the ruling coalition. There we go. Speaking fees, says Devoy.
Yeah.
It's why would you pay that much to hear someone speak? It's not like they're going to say something erudite that's going to change, inspire you and change your worldview. It's because if they can bring people into the same room who are useful to talk to for various business deals, this is what it's for. It's for influence. It's for reach, right? This is why they're so valuable. That's why there's a revolving door between the regulators and the industries they regulate in many parts of the West. Corruption can be done without major sort of legal ramifications as just the normal way of doing things a lot of the time. And I think part of the problem is that we have this idea, one of the ways that people measure corruption internationally is they look at petty corruption. Do a lot of people take bribes? Yeah, that doesn't really sort of answer the question. So the thing is, petty corruption is easily measured, right? Petty corruption is easily measured, whereas grand corruption is very difficult to measure. There's no way you can stick a universal format and metric on it. And my dad's just chipped in with a comment over here. He says, with Biden, get your son to sell paintings. That's a famous way of laundering money. I mean, even the U.S. diplomatic service is known for using the paintings that and artworks that it shuttles around between various embassies for laundering money. Because art is subjective. Any price tag can mean anything. Wonderful way to launder money. Wonderful. And
there's also the issue for corruption. Sorry, there's also the issue for measuring corruption is the fact that, especially in a country like South Africa, how much of it is corruption? How much of it is just incompetence? Are you paying triple tender because you just are incapable of functioning efficiently, or is it because you're getting some money on the side?
Well, I mean, it's usually both, but I mean, the staggering thing about the DA is that people go, they do the audits. It's like, well, do you have a receipt for everything? Yes. Oh, clean audit. What? No, that's it. That's what a clean audit means. It means you just literally have all of the receipts. It's not. No one looks at the receipts. No one asks, well, did that money actually go to a project? Was the project executed? Was someone cut in that shouldn't have been cut in? No one asks those questions. I mean, hell's bells. The DA are not as squeaky clean as that. I mean, Neisner Tourism, for example. I mean, the poor guy, I almost call him Mike Stockforth. That's not him. Mike Hampton. Mike Hampton had his entire life ruined because he had a little deal with them that went sideways. He looks into it, and when I say a little deal, I mean it was peanuts. He had a small, if I remember correctly, it was a workshop to teach local people how to host music events, because that was his thing. He was a musician, DJ from Durban, comes down to the Cape, all that. And they didn't hold up to his contract. They didn't hold up to his contract, and they made him. They forced him to have They wouldn't allow him to make his own posters, and he was like, "No, but the guys you're asking to make the posters are cuck at their job. Why can't I use my own posters?" No, because they have a permanent contract with us and they have monopoly over all of this. So, but who are these people? Oh, they're friends of that person. So he starts looking into this, and he goes and he checks out. And it turns out Neisner Tourism is just friends of DA councillors and some DA councillors having a loss-leading business which they're dumping sort of council funds into. You're not allowed to actually you're not actually allowed to fund an indebted business under, I think, the Municipal Structures Act or some such thing. I can't remember which one of the municipal management bills it's under, but you're not allowed to do that. And the DA continued to do that. And the more that Mike looked into this, the more difficult his life got. One of the most extraordinary details here is that they got the DA managed to get an ear, nose, and throat specialist who'd never met Mike to testify in court that Mike, under his professional medical opinion, was mentally ill. I was flabbergasted. The details in the story are absolutely mind-blowing. The problem is that Mike, his stuff is not organized. And so I promised him I'd get back to writing this story. But it's a mountain of stuff. It's a mountain of stuff he's got. The amount of nonsense he was treated to is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And the DA managed to get a judge to block any of his writing on this topic. There's certain people that he's not allowed to actually mention in public under any circumstances. It's crazy, and they haven't managed to do that with other people. But Mike was particularly sort of out of his depth, which is very sad. He sort of became a bit socially radioactive as a result of what's going on. I mean, some of the stuff that the DA councillors were spreading on Facebook about him were like accusing him of raping and murdering children. Like they'd pick like missing children cases locally and they'd accuse him of raping and murdering them.
That is, those sort of bullying tactics are
right. So that's the DA.
South Africa.
Yeah, that's the DA really. I mean, my particular reason for like this is the last straw with the DA, where I'm not even going to consider a reasonable bunch of people, was dealing with my own problems in the municipality. Because I mean, right now under my property, probably even under my feet right now, you've got a river that's running underneath me. Now, 10 years ago, we had a massive sinkhole open up in the driveway over there, just behind the camera. And it had to be filled at our expense because the council says, sorry, fellas, it's your business. Sorry. Outside the river running by my house has like got a culvert that was built in like the 1930s. Has not been repaired once in that time. Right? That's because it kind of holds together for the first 60, 70 years. It's not made out of, it's not made out of Roman concrete, which reinforces in a wet environment. No, it's made out of regular old concrete that crumbles away over time. And it was being carved out in this one pool where the concrete is missing over here, just before the weir that dumps into the river, where there actually used to be a deep water channel, but most of it's been buried now because it hasn't been dredged for nearly a century. But now the erosion's gotten so bad that the water carved in a hole underneath the bridge. Now this is unambiguously municipal territory, so they can't dodge this one. And the water is doing this long loop underneath the road, underneath my house, underneath the side of the embankment, and coming out like on the one side. And finally, when I say the water's underneath my house, my councillor finally gets off his bum and calls the engineer. The engineer comes down the same day because he's a really nice guy, Northwest Province, Tswana guy. But now he can't do anything because the local bureaucracy is so stiff that it's taken him more than 3 weeks to requisition a bloody bag of cement. They had municipal workers. They got 10 municipal workers. I kid you not, 10, where 8 of them stand around while 2 stack sandbags into a little corner of the river. That's what they did. And the river flowed a little bit like in the normal way for like a day, and then it just like ducked through and punched the sandbags in. It
is the DA, and unambiguously, it is the DA.
Miserable. I mean, my little local informant. I say little. He's my senior, so I should talk respectfully. Fantastic source of information, by the way, if he's listening. My informant has been dumping a few things into my basket recently. And he did a bit on like George municipality and stuff. They have the current scandal is that they're protecting this guy called I can't remember what his first name is, but his surname is Figland, and he was caught in a sexting scandal with a high school girl. Because the girl's father sort of brought it to they don't want to do anything to Sean Figland. And then they had the mayor of George come out and openly admit, we don't really do building inspections. Like right after that big building collapse that was news everywhere, even internationally. So he comes on like the local news channel because like the George Herald and all of those guys, they've been bought up by a company that has like a little YouTube channel and they occasionally do little interviews and whatever. They're good. They're one of the few little places you get like decent local news from is that cluster of papers. Anyway, so Van Wyk comes on and he says, like, actually, no, like, we don't have anyone qualified to do building inspections anywhere in the Western Cape, so we don't actually really do building inspections. So they think about getting rid of him. So they try and get rid of him. The local guys try and get rid of him, and Helen Zille swoops in and says, no, you're not getting rid of that guy. Sorry, I like him. So he's still there.
That is incredible. First of all, that is the laziest excuse that you could possibly come up with.
It's mental. And do you know the worst part is the way that they're compensating for it is Jordan Hill Lewis decided after like 10 years of letting some property developer have his way to swoop in on the guy and say, I see you haven't got a license, 1 million rand fine, thank you very much. But the department had already okayed it for human habitation you have to get permission in order to connect water and electricity. They'd already collected the water and electricity. So they recognized that the building this is going to be a lawsuit. What are they doing? Like,
I don't know.
It's standard practice. You ask anyone in the construction sector, like the guy who redid our roof because it was falling in, such is life. So he says, in many cases, we just build. Like, we don't wait for permission because there's always a problem. There's always some bureaucratic hurdle. You just build. You ignore the permissions and you build. And then when it's a fait accompli, the local government says, fine, whatever. Right? Signs off on it. So that's how Amazon got their office block on the Lisbech River, is they just built. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for the court case to come through that the Horangai Corner were trying to push through. No, they just built. And then the DA come around cutting ribbons. Look how lovely, how many jobs we're creating.
Yeah, but this actually, in terms of South Africa's legal system, I don't know, Martin van Staden has said that the South African legal system, he said it's 9/10 possession, right? So I think, in terms of the practicality of it, I think it's probably very easy to get away. I mean, it is very easy to get away with. We see it all the time, but I think it's quite legally defensible. It's very difficult to overturn something like that.
Yeah, but look, I mean, another story but it's interesting to see where they do apply the law. So here's something that I'm running tomorrow. So it's already been, one half of the story has been run in Ground Up, the socialist guys. Devolve, you're absolutely correct. I can already feel the rainbow creeping in my veins. I am sorry. But for some reason, I still have my tonsils, right? And I quit smoking because my wife can't stand it. And the thing is, when I try and start up smoking again, or when I try and quit vaping, I end up smoking again because I can't kick the stuff. But when I smoke cigarettes again, my tonsils get so inflamed, I can't deal with it. So vaping it is, for the time being, I'm afraid. Very uncool, but the flesh is
very
weak.
Millennial of you.
Yeah, very millennial. But no, my wife is very based. She's she's from Namibia. She's a redheaded Afrikaner. I can't you can't get more based than that. Short temper, Christian fundamentalist. So no. Very sound moral position that lady has. But where was I? Okay, so Ground Up, socialist Anglo little paper. They do good investigative journalism. I'm not going to deny them that they do, but I just don't like their byline. So they did this one story on a white trailer park in Hermanus that just got evicted, right?
What
And
trailer?
a white trailer park that got evicted in, you're squatters, you're getting evicted, and like, and so I thought, hang on a second, you haven't been evicting the land invasions that have been organized by the Land Party. So why have you been going after the white squatters? I mean, it's not like the white squatters are burning down people's, businesses like the Land Party's guys have been. I mean, they literally burn down anyone whose business is associated with white people. That it's like the most virulent nonsense, and the DA are just like sitting there appeasing them. When they set up a new squatter camp, they go, "Oh, how can we connect your water and electricity, please? We'll get you some title deeds so that it can be formalized, and you don't have to be illegal anymore." Like,
Well, in terms of the white squatter camp,
do you think these people are going to vote for you? They hate you. They absolutely hate you. If they are burning down businesses and threatening to kill people for associating with white people, do you think that there's any part of their community who's going to go, no, the DA, ooh. Like,
this is a strange strain of the DA that I know. It seems that Gordon Hill Lewis is very into it. This idea that the minorities vote you in so that you can take their money and give it to the poor black majority, which,
right?
in terms of like a sort of moral framework, okay, there's obviously the idea of you have to uplift the poor in society and whatnot. And I think most South Africans, well, certainly most South Africans, but even most DA members can get behind that. But it's like having that as your primary mode of trying to gain votes just makes no sense.
Yeah,
Like,
look at it. I mean, he stands up in council and says, "Look, we have 75% of our budget is for free services to the poor who don't actually pay taxes." And I'm like, what
maybe
are you doing?
maybe they think those services are coming from the ANC government. Maybe that's why they keep voting ANC.
This is the nutty thing, is that the way that they're compensating for it is they're trying to drive property prices up. So they're making it really hard for any working person who contributes to the real economy to actually live in the city. So like the only way you can get into the city is if you're fabulously wealthy or willing to live in a shoebox or willing to steal land. It's like you're liquidating everything for no gain whatsoever.
Yeah.
And if you point this out, it's like, oh no, that's racist. I don't care. Look at the numbers. It says there in black and white, that you are simply not getting. I mean, Gavin van Onselen's study shows exactly what I've been trying to argue for the last couple of years, is that you do not get any votes from black people in significant numbers. The DA looks at them and say, oh, look, a quarter of our voters and supporters are black. And I say, yes, but how many of black people vote for you? It's like, yeah, they're a much bigger population. Of course, if a tiny percentage of them vote for you, they're going to contribute a lot to your numbers.
Yeah, and I wonder.
Good for them. They're voting for something more sensible than the ANC. Good for them. On the other hand, what exactly are you gaining, and why are those people voting for you? They're not voting for you because you're giving out handouts. Those people are voting for you because they want to see things look neat and tidy and not money stolen. That's the portion of the black population that give a damn about that kind of stuff, right? That's what they want. You handing the free stuff brigade are handing it out to people who don't care about that. And the colored people who vote for you, they're not voting for you. Yes, they do want the free stuff because there's a great welfare dependency. But that's not why they're voting DA. They're voting DA because the ANC discriminates against them. It's not rocket science, you know.
But I do wonder, and this just popped into my head. So, in terms of the DA's penetration with black communities, it's It's everywhere basically flatlined, and then there's Gauteng where it's actually fairly impressive, right? Considering
This is true.
the
This is
history of
true.
the DA. So I wonder, and I would love to know what the DA's on the ground campaigning is in Gauteng. But I wonder if the emphasis on sort of developing the Black community in Western Cape is essentially sort of like a marketing ploy to sort of bolster their I guess poor upliftment credentials for their campaigning in Gauteng. So
Yeah.
maybe they're not trying to win the black vote here. Maybe they're trying to win the black vote in Gauteng, and they're using us as the cash cows to get that done.
I see that, but I mean, you've got to listen to what they literally say. So their perspective is like, okay, well, we've shown that we can do a good job in Cape Town, and then it spread to the Western Cape. So now people will vote for us in the rest of the country, and then somehow that hasn't happened, right? And they think, oh, well, they just need to be shown harder, right? And they'll get it. But that's not why they're voting. They tell you why they're voting. They say, white people are benefiting, we must benefit. White people must not benefit, right? And so we got, like, you don't understand. This is not about, like, material benefit in an absolute sense. It's about resentment, right? And then they get into national government and they're like, yes, now we're going to show them that we are going to make the ANC get into shape and sort things out. And it's like, that's not why people are voting. There is a very definite layer of black middle class people. They're not very big, but they are real, who do want the DA and or Action SA and or etc. and don't like the charterist nonsense that ANC, EFF, MK, blah blah. But then they're not a large portion of the population, and they can't act as much more than a small buffer against that, as sensible as they might be about various things.
And I wonder for that specific group, because just in terms of the how things tend to play out in South Africa, it seems that the tertiary educated black population tends to vote EFF, or disproportionately to every other group, they vote EFF. They seem to be much more into this sort of this left-wing intelligentsia. But I would love to know specifically what's like the developmental story of the black middle class that votes DA. What causes that to form as opposed to just the tenderpreneur middle class that vote ANC, or the uni-educated black middle class that votes EFF? Like,
it is funny. I mean, look, I think it's a certain kind of guy, who they've grown up around white people and they realized, we're not all fire-breathing dragons, and they don't and they maybe had like a stable home life, and so they kind of go, well, they're not insecure about that kind of social stuff. So they don't have the resentment, and they just sort of look a little bit more objectively at matters.
Then pause, examine that. Why is that not what the DA has been pushing for the last 15 years?
Yeah, social conservatism. Do you mean?
Well, no, not even just that. Just in terms of this development of that specific type of person. I mean,
it's a curious question.
But
it's a curious question. I mean, because I think the thing is that I think they worry more about the critics that are socially proximate to them. So there's the people above them in the international arena who are saying, well, there's so much inequality. What are you doing about the inequality? And then there's people next to them and saying, well, there's a lot of poverty around, and white people are doing so well, and so on. And then they think, well, yeah, but look at what we're doing here. We're definitely not like that, So there's that. I think it's a social anxiety thing and a career anxiety thing, because they want to put something nice on their CV so they can go overseas. Like, I mentioned Beverly Schaefer earlier. What did she do after passing that education policy? Sorry, not bill. She went to work for the NHS in the UK.
That's why I've never heard from her. That makes sense.
Yeah, although it's Debbie. No, it's Debbie Schaefer, not Beverly Schaefer. I keep confusing the two. Beverly Schaefer is the one who, with the benefit scandal around vehicle allowances, that was the Speaker of the provincial parliament now. Yeah, no, for Devolve, no, Schaefer's that's not a Jewish family actually. I know. I think one of them is Jewish, but the other one's actually of Protestant German extraction. So I stand to be corrected, but I don't think so. It's one must remember that silly ideas like this are not exclusively within one domain or another. One must examine empirically, I'll say. There is a bit of a problem. Do you think the DA dies if the GNU doesn't perform? Yeah, of course. Not die. It's going to decline.
It depends. I think it depends on the manner in which it does.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to die. It's just too old and venerable. I mean, in one form or another, that party has existed since 1896, and I think that when liberals say that they're the oldest political tradition in the country, they really do have a point. You look at the nature of the Cape Colony when it first started to get elections and stuff back in 1857, and even before then. The British Liberals really did shape the entire nature of political dialogue, and then the South African Party, born in the Cape Colony in 1896, Schreiner family, and all of that. Who, interestingly enough, is it William Schreiner, who started the party? His daughter was, I think it was his daughter, Olive Schreiner, who wrote that book, Story of an African Farm. And then buggered off to the UK and fell in love with an asexual sexologist who was a member of the Fabian Society and made best friend with Karl Marx's daughter. There's some very funny little loops that
lots of colorful characters.
Yeah, but I mean that whole little period of our history, there's a certain kind of idea cluster that you see in those Cape Anglos at the time, where they combine a bit of they're a bit of sort of Darwinist, a little bit of Darwinist eugenics, a little bit of Georgist socialism, and a lot of like free market tradey stuff. So there's because at this time it's also the same sort of trendy crowd, crowd of ideas that you see in the United Kingdom forming into the Fabian Society later, or should I say earlier, because it's 1884 over there that they form. But at the time they were quite small. George Bernard Shaw hadn't quite put them on the map yet. But now I'm digressing heavily. The point is the DA is born out of a certain strand that gained absolute dominance. I mean, when the South African Party broke onto the scene after unification, you get Jan Smuts in charge, and then Jan Smuts goes off and does, extends a certain brand of universalist liberalism, which asks for infinite government intervention into all things. Right from the get-go, he writes the Constitution single-handedly. He does it like at home. He writes the whole thing out, then he plops it on the desk and says, "Hey, you guys vote for this." But he does that so many times. He did that with the League of Nations. He designed several parts of the United Nations later, wrote its preamble. He wrote the interim constitution for the Transvaal between 1900 and 1909. This guy, like, people forget, he just did everything. Like, you really need to read Holy.
He was the acting prime minister of the whole British Empire at one stage. Like, this is a very influential person.
Something like that. But you have to read his philosophy, because he holism and evolution has this whole sort of thing where the fabric of the universe is constantly sort of combining combining parts into greater systems that increase their complexity logistically over time. And you have, I mean, you can sort of see a similar thing in sort of Nick Land or even like Hegel or whatever. And like this is the thing, he came from a particular school of thought called English idealism, where they were trying to combine sort of English sort of biological ideas out of Darwinism and so on into this German idealism, which tried to get this comprehensive picture of the functioning of all reality. And I think Jan Smuts really came the closest to formulating this, for good or ill. I'm not a fan of him. I'm not a big agreeer with him, but it's something you have to read, because this perspective of like this, there's a definite continuation of progress, and that is that all peoples everywhere. So the first thing is like, okay, inert matter gives rise to life and greater complexity and forms this ecosystem, right? And then this gives rise to greater sort of wholes, like, the human species, which has this thing called spirit. And spirit then desires to unify itself into something greater than the sum of its parts. And that thing, this common human consciousness, will be realized through a global government in the form, as he puts it, in the form of the League of Nations, because when he was writing this in 1926, the United Nations hasn't existed yet. So then, when the United Nations
organization of the League of Nations,
correct, and it's interesting because it's around this time that the Roundtable Group, of which he joined after the war, which had instigated the South African War to begin with, that Roundtable Group in the 1920s, in the late 20s, merged with the Fabian Society. It's now known as Chatham House. It's one of the most influential groups on the planet. It's part of a cluster of Anglo-American sort of policy, sort of agenda-setting bodies that are quite venerable and very sort of pointed. So the Fabian Society, by the way, if you don't know, they have deployed 114 MPs to the British Parliament now. So if you think that they're a sort of little bookworm club, don't kid yourself. They mean business. And they have this offshoot called Common Purpose, which you'll find very little writing about anywhere in public, but you should look up the book that was written by Julia Middleton, who founded it. She was given the public mandate and the funding by John Prescott of the Labour Party. And when she wrote this, she wrote a book on it in 2007, where she credits her and her colleagues with recruiting Cyril Ramaphosa and Kuben Naidu. So yeah, these are not people to these are not people to mess with. I think look, the best word for you can't call it the Anglo-Boer War. I think that is the only name for the war that is wrong. You can call it the Second Anglo-Boer War. You can call it the Second War for Independence, or you can call it the South African War because it gave rise to South Africa. But just
in Afrikaans, don't they call it the Second Freedom War?
The Tweede Vryheidsoorlog, so the Second War of Independence. Which the first one won, the second one they lost.
The first one was more of just a series of skirmishes, and then the British quickly lost interest.
Well, this is true, but I mean, it is also one of the few examples in history of a successful tax revolt.
That's true. The second one was the Joburg Etolls.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to be the guys who tried to pull off the Bambata uprising. That thing ended ugly. Poor buggers. But Tweede Vryheidsoorlog, daar het jy hom. So Jan Smuts had this particular perspective that basically the purpose of the entire fabric of the universe is to create a global government over planet Earth. Like, if you don't understand that, like to bring all human beings into one great organism, we are one.
The foundation of the DA is globalism. So.
Yeah, look at the way they talk about South Africa. They're actually opposed to anything that keeps South Africa having any kind of coherent character. I mean, look, this is a subtlety of Jan Smuts's ideas that were Smuts was a big suck up to Wilson. Smuts was an enormous sucker to Wilson. Wilson actually really liked him. And Wilson gave him free rein to design the League of Nations because he liked his ideas so much. And part of the appeal is that Jan Smuts's philosophical cornerstone was the works of Walt Whitman. So Walt Whitman comes from that New England idealist school, and he uses that as the basis, as a sort of basis of ideas. That there's a weird mysticism in there. Then he uses that to sort of tie together Hegel and Darwin, you know?
Yeah, sorry, I just see a
you are being put on the spot, Leo. Do you think the Second Boer War was justified?
Oh, I mean, the Second Boer War was more or less just a very blatant resource grab by the British Empire. I don't think they would contest with that summation of what they were trying to do. It's unfortunate that things worked. Might was right back then, to some extent, still is now.
I think it requires a particularly narcissistic prick to actually try and find a justification for it, because then you get the people who sit and say, well, actually, the reason it's justified is because we were better custodians of the blacks than the Boers were. Which is exactly the argument that Cecil Rhodes put forward in order to justify it. You understand?
Instead of slavery, the Anglos put like 20,000 black people in concentration camps. So
yes, but our concentration camps are kinder. You see.
True.
It's much better than working. It's much better to eat ground glass than to work for the Boer. You know. Fascinating stuff. But I suspect, Cecil Rhodes. The thing about these characters like Rhodes or Smuts or anyone like this is, people look back on them and they say, they're nasty, evil, whatever. And you get these Afrikaners who, will have an extreme sort of victim mentality about this kind of stuff, and they'll take it very bitterly. And at the same time, they'll turn around and look at the Africans who resent them for what they've done and say, well, how can you tear down our statues? And I sort of think, well, what are you doing? What are you actually doing? What's going on up here? These are men who've done more with their lives than anyone you'll ever meet in yours, right? Almost certainly, right? And they've done things that are terrible and have hurt us, going, the effect. But the effects have lasted generations. How do you live a life so large that you affect generations after you? Whether you're good or evil, that's a person that you've got to read into, right? How can you not spend your time reading about Rhodes or Stalin or Hitler or Napoleon or, Emperor Meiji or whatever? These are guys who there's no way that you can, resent someone so much that you're not at least curious what's going on. What made them big and powerful and great and interesting. So,
and it's also just that these people. I mean, we've reached a stage now where almost everyone's history affects everyone else's history in some way or another, right? So when we read up on people like Napoleon, I mean, it was the Napoleonic Wars that caused the Brits to take over the Dutch Cape Colony, right? If we read about Hitler, it was the Second World War that essentially created this whole new international system that we all abide by, right? It was the first
not only
war
that,
that caused the to take over Namibia.
not only that, but without the Second World War, you wouldn't have had the SAP losing the election in 1948, and you wouldn't have had the NP coming to power. I learned an interesting factoid because I didn't bother comparing South Africa to the rest of the continent because I always felt like the rest of the continent's dark, because the whole of our lives the rest of Africa has been just a pit of despair. But it's really weird. The Congo, the DRC, they had a greater GDP per capita than South Africa, like 3 times the size in 1961.
In South Africa in 1961.
Right. If you can believe something like that. So, and I thought about this for a second. Then I remembered, well, what was the actual development policy of the British-friendly government in South Africa? They built very, very little. They didn't develop the Bantustans. In fact, what they did, they didn't even tax the white population very much. They drew more tax from black South Africans who'd never touched a penny in their lives than they did from the white population. And they did that in order to drive them into the city so they could have cheap labor and wouldn't have to pay white man wages in the mines.
Yeah.
And
Also,
like that whole dynamic, that sort of conflict between separate development and Boskap that is something that is, I mean, to use a Marxist term, that was the inherent contradiction in the system. The problem is that, you know, people haven't realized that you can't have both, because if you want the cheap labor, you change your demographics. You cannot manage that flow indefinitely. But the thing is that once the Afrikaners came to power, they realized, well, we can't have that system. We've got to figure out a way of developing these other areas so they don't keep trying to come into ours. So they poured so much money that they outspent the entire United Nations. Right? Now, the United Nations, granted, is not like a major, you know, they're not like the United States or Soviet Union or whatever at the time. They're not that big and powerful money-wise, but it's a lot of money. It's millions and millions and millions and millions of rands, and at a time when they're more valuable than dollars. And they developed the local economy so much. Black wages for about 15 years before sanctions started kicking in. Black wages were increasing on an average of 50% a year, while white wages were increasing by 3% a year. So you can see this complete transformation. The inequality, not only within but between races, decreased while the Nationalist Party was in power. Like, people just, this is something that nobody can fit into their heads. Like, I can't find anyone who understands this. Like, anyone left of outright apartheid apologists can't think about this.
I think it's just I think it's an issue of when people examine this period of history. What people can't separate is the material conditions and the moral conditions of us, or like the justice of a situation. You know, the whole separate development, the whole system of apartheid was grossly offensive to any sort of human rights that
to any human rights approach. But I mean, look, rather than sort of trying to plug into the sort of really pathetic human rights stuff, which I think is it's just a poor frame because it's completely nebulous. What has to be thought about here is A, the contradiction I just mentioned, and B, the humiliation, that sort of the daily humiliation of black people. The problem with that daily humiliation is that it doesn't matter if your material conditions are increasing. I mean, the commute that you have to do in 1986, right? You know, they estimate the normal daily commute that a black worker has to do in order to sort of keep within the pass laws. They do like an 8 hours of commuting a day. It's really brutal. So the real problem is that white people weren't willing to become uncomfortable for even a few years in order to establish separate development properly. They couldn't let go of the Boskap scenario, and that's what undid us, because the black areas within white South Africa just keep growing. They keep growing because there's massive demand for the cheap labor, even to the point that it becomes an issue, or we have an issue with immigration and questions of, well, do we bring in Africans from the rest of the continent because you know, black wages are increasing. And that's actually what caused the Nationalist Party to throw in the towel and say, okay, we're done. Because in the early 70s, they started noticing this trend. And the Broederbond, I mean, Herman Gilliameer mentions this in the last Afrikaners. And that they were thinking about doing this like in the early 70s already. And after the mining strike of 73, they just decided, we cannot manage the labor movement anymore. We're going to have to deregulate this whole business, right? And after Henry Kissinger visited them, they said, let's just throw in the towel. Doesn't matter. The reformers had their impetus to move, and they embargoed Rhodesia. They started lifting the what's it called, the color bar on like skilled labor which, I mean, if you read the history of the white labor unions, you just watch like this, backpedaling panic for the next, 15, 20 years. And it just if they fight on a point, they just get undercut by new colored and Indian and black labor. They didn't win anything after that. So, I mean, people talk about like population growth and whatever, but the real dynamics are those market things. I mean, Richard Poplak, God bless his soul, posted something very funny. He was talking about how disorganized and chaotic the ownership structure of the mines was, saying, "Oh, it was a total shit show." Blah blah blah. I sort of thought, well, you're missing the forest for the trees. If you read anything about the history of the Oppenheimer family, the reason it was so complex is because they had a strategy for making sure that they had a minority interest in almost every single industry and company, such that they could actually control directly or indirectly about 80% of the formal economy by the late 80s, which is why they funded both the Nationalist Party, the divestment and sanctions brigade, and covertly the ANC, because that pressure collectively forced all of the foreign companies to sell their assets off at fire sale prices. So then Oppenheimers swoop in, buy it up, make sure that their friends get the pieces they can't afford to buy right away. And then when the markets open up, everyone unbundles and restructures and sells things off and makes bank. And in 2012, after they've been doing BEE for a few years, Oppenheimers divest from all of that, diversify into like tourism and game farms and agricultural land. And they're doing hunky-dory. They've moved into things like logistics and so on. It's like, well, leave the mines. Who needs a volatile asset like that?
Anyone who invested in South Africa just before the sanctions started getting lifted, they must have made serious bank, because the first 15 years of South Africa's post 1994 history was just line goes up and up. It was looking
exactly. I mean, not even that, but if you pick the right moment, you could run your business on a loss for an extraordinarily long period of time, because the inflation rate was so high, and so it just makes debt super cheap. So you could, I mean, things were a mess for that whole sanctions period. It's cock funny. I mean, we sit here, I mean, think about it for a second. Everything we described, at no point did we mention the ANC. Like, they're not actually a factor in this. Because they come back after 77. They come back in the scene in 79. That's when they pop their head up again. And it's like, well, now in the 80s, you have a big... Now the world has decided already that South Africa's on their way out, and the NP's decided apartheid's on their way out. Now we're going to show up and kill all of the other liberation leaders so that they can't negotiate.
Yeah, even Nelson Mandela wrote about this. I mean, if you read... what's it called? Like Meditations to Myself or whatever. Like it's a book just full of like all of the loose ends that he wrote to people, or things he said to people. And upon just before exiting prison, I think that this was around about mid 80s or early 80s, he said that I thought that the liberation struggle died after the mid 60s. he genuinely was not even convinced that there was a liberation struggle from that period until roundabout when it started looking like things were speeding up in that regard.
Yeah, but it goes back further than that, because I was doing something for AfriForum. I was preparing a document on moral character of the ANC, and I stumbled on something in R.W. Johnson's book. When I was breezing through, which I'd missed, which is that the Defiance campaign in the 50s, that was entirely driven by a reaction to people like in the PAC and so on, and they were worried that they were going to get flanked, so they actually went to the And this is, you know, from the horse's mouth, like Ruth First and all these people in the South African Communist Party saying, we are worried about being flanked by black nationalists, so we, the communists, have to come up with our own campaign. So like the ANC is always reacting to someone else who's coming first from a nationalist perspective and saying, well, we, the communists, have to like react to this before. And they're pretty good actually at reacting to this. I mean, you have to admit, I mean, look, the IFP, they show up only in 1975, and already before, by the time the ANC have a comeback, the IFP have got 330,000 members. That's not small beer. That's like when South Africa had half the population it does now. They have a membership that's almost as big as the Solidarity movement. This is serious business.
I do wonder, because obviously at some point, I would love if we could pinpoint a time exactly, but at some point the international community handpicked the ANC to be the representative body of Black South Africans, right? But I think just from their Soviet connections and that sort of special relationship, they learned all of the tips and tricks of how to gently or very not gently get your way with opposing political groups.
I don't think they were picked by the West. I think the West tried to co-opt them, because the way that I look at it is that there was some hints here and there that the US are backing the the BPC, the Black People's Convention. That's Steve Biko's group, right? Now, the only traces I can find are from the US Information Agency's yearbooks and budget meeting minutes, which are public. You can find them on the internet. They actually set up a reading room in Soweto, and I looked up. There was an interview with the American ambassador at the time who mentioned some of the stuff they were showing the kids at the time was like roots, like all of these like weird. Anyway, doesn't matter. So they actually helped. They helped sort of support what became the Soweto uprising. So, and I mean, in the same budget meeting, the next item on the list after reading room in Soweto is how is we want to introduce affirmative action for female employees in the USIA, which is like, so the thing with the ANC is that they smashed the groups that America was friendly with, the BPC that became ASAPO, and then the IFP, and the ANC was still taking direct instructions from Moscow right at the end. But after 85, you start seeing them talk to each other now, in a more serious fashion. And what they did after, I think, 1991 or 92, they started sending ANC members to there was a small CIA-run school that they propped up in South Africa. And I've been trying to find this reference for years because I found it when I was at university. And so they set up a department somewhere in South Africa attached to one of the universities. And it was CIA-run, and they ran like economics courses. And that was the specific target. They wanted to like tell the ANC leaders, we're happy to work with you, but please try and learn some economics first. Try this, please don't seize all the assets because they are of vital interest to us. And, with the Soviet Union collapsing, they cornered the market. And the funny thing is that the ANC wasn't talking to China at the time because there was that Sino-Soviet split. The ANC actually recognized Taiwan when they came to power. They continued the apartheid policy, and Mandela's position was, well, we're not taking sides here. We're going to recognize Taiwan. We're going to recognize China. Two-China policy, fine. I don't care. When, when you guys sort it out, I'll be there. And then by the end of his presidency, when he was sort of being shunted out of the way due to old age, he was sidestepped by his own ministers who approached China and got them to move to the one China policy. And then China's official relationship with the ANC starts in 1998. So there's that little window where, at a crucial moment, the Americans got profound influence with the ANC and got them to back down from the most egregious sort of economic positions, and the NP did actually have a fair amount to bargain with, you know.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting because I think it was in Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. He wrote about when he became president and he did the rounds, speaking to like the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, about the economic policies that he was wanting to implement. He spoke to them about about nationalizing key industries, promoting social studies, even as late as when he was in power. And he said he wrote that what they did was that they listened to him very carefully. This is in his words, and they explained to him exactly what would happen if they tried to implement those policies. And he wrote that it was very clear that they were wanting to bridge the gap, but they didn't think that Mandela was a very clever person after having listened to his policies. So he decided that from his engagements with these, I mean, he says this openly, from his engagements with these international bodies, he decided that these policies were just not going to work for South Africa.
what I find really interesting about this point in time is when people look back at Thabo Mbeki, they see a Thatcherite. But what's really interesting is if you listen to his actual language when he's talking about these policies, is he mentions the third way. And it's like nobody knows what the fucking third way is. Third way, Fabian Society, come on, big flashing lights, Anthony Giddens. You know,
a lot of like the philosophical stuff started under Mbeki, really, right? The stuff that we're just inundated with today. Most of it started under Mbeki's administration, or at least that's when it became like really serious.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he tried with a lot of technocratic stuff, and he also pushed the perspective that one needs to build a black capital elite in order to capture the
African Renaissance. Yes, he was very big into this idea.
Right. Well, the African Renaissance is more about building connections with the continent, but there is some overlap. Now, the thing about building that elite is that ties into what Ramaphosa was thinking about. So Ramaphosa, I think Ramaphosa is a little bit subtler, a little bit more committed than most people think. Because I mean, when you look at his little frog boiling speech and everything like that, I imagine that he sat there looking at what was going under Nelson Mandela and said, "Well, yeah, we're not going to win this battle, so we're going to have to walk slower towards the same goal." So his point was, well, let's go back to that whole two-stage revolutionary theory that the South African Communist Party came up with in 1928. He says, well, it's not just about capturing the state. It's okay, we've got the state, but we haven't got the economy. So how do we capture the economy? Well, BEE shows up because they were planning on doing something like what Jeremy Corbyn was proposing when he last ran for prime minister, where he says, "Oh, we're going to seize 10% of every privately owned company over a certain size." So the ANC proposed this policy, and the Oppenheimer family's Brenthurst Foundation came up with, well, what if you just placed a whole bunch of black people on the boards and let the companies decide who to go with? And they say, great idea. So let's make it party members getting on into the board. So you have this very, very unique way of everyone, this very sort of interesting little nudgy chess match between the two of them, between the two of these sides. You've got these legacy white oligarchs with overseas business ties, and you've got the ANC trying to move towards this. And I think they're at now at a point where they've got all of the reforms in place to actually implement the Freedom Charter in all of its ugly, gory detail. You know, all of the land reform stuff, all of the nationalization stuff. It's sitting there waiting in the wings. Like most of the bills have been written. And including stuff like the district development model, which I cannot understand why this is not a bigger focus. The district development model, where we forget the municipalities. We look at the 50 districts, and we have the national government sitting in coordinated committees with provincial and district level governments, and then we tell them how to design their infrastructure policies and everything like that. So we beg your pardon.
Seizure of the municipal development, sort of their function, you know.
Right,
I feel like it's
exactly.
already accounted for in the jobs of the municipal.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, look at how the DA prioritized BEE contracts in their procurement system. I mean, it's like,
Sure.
what are you doing? You don't have to do that. It's not legally mandatory. It's government it's national government policy. Why are you prioritizing BEE in your municipality? I thought you were for minority rights and liberalism and, you know, meritocracy and all that. Oh no, but you know, no, yeah. They never really asked that. It's not law. It's not law.
Yeah, I wonder, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe honestly, maybe it's just a case of the DA is deeply insecure about the racism accusations that are constantly levied against it. Maybe
I think it's also their pussies about legal. I think they're all pussies about legal issues. So the whole they don't want to test boundaries very much, so they wait for permission. I mean, I remember one of the things that was one of the best insights I got into this was from an interview I did with Alan Windy earlier this year, where he did one of these like digicons. I hate these little weird.
Oh yes, we spoke about this.
Yeah, I told you about that. Where he goes, well, actually, I was told by the Exco you can't do energy generation. We've got to trust the ANC will fix the problem. Like, what are you? Are these people on crack?
By the way, this is supposed to be the opposition party in South Africa. They're supposed to. They're not supposed to be this sort of loyal, faithful to the ANC.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the hard part. I mean, trying to convince minorities and white people in particular to drop the guilt about actually just pursuing their own self-interest is a monumental task. You have to be. The thing is, I find the hard thing I find is how much patience you have to have. It's you have to spoon feed people infinite detail about what's going on, and you got to hope that someday the penny drops. That they have to like, and I mean the thing is, the hard part is the people for whom the penny's dropped already. That they take this hysterical position, shall I say? And the hysterical position is this, where they say, well, you know, we have to go like full Adolf Hitler. And I say, well, A, you're a tiny ass minority. You can't do that.
Oh, good luck with that.
And so in the meantime, you're sitting there sort of like, you know, hoping for, you know, Jesus to come, or, you know, super white Jesus to come down and save you. And in the meantime, you do nothing, you know, because there isn't anything you can do there. I mean, like, I think about my father-in-law, right? Who's sort of, I mean, he's by all accounts, he was a competent military man. But his approach to dealing with like things collapsing is he imagines it'll all happen at once and there'll be a big war and you can hide out for a couple of months deep in the mountains and then everything will be okay. And then you come out and you're chilled, you're pashash. And like, that's not how these conflicts work. It's absolutely not how it's like, think about it. Like, what did the collapse of colonial society in the rest of Africa look like? It was decades and decades and decades of internecine warfare. And it didn't happen overnight that everything just touch paper lit. It was, I mean, well, in many places it was. But you know, I don't know how else to put this other than you're not going to see a Rwandan genocide thing happen here. It's just simply not logistically possible in this context. So you're going to have to think.
So yeah, I just want to warn you, my laptop's battery is very low. I've been without power the whole day. So
okay. Well, that's a good time to wrap up. It's just to say, obviously everyone's got a sort of natural and inalienable right in the sort of literal sense of that term. In that you really can't take away people's efforts to pursue their self-interest. You can't make them not do that. You can convince them not to, which and then they're idiots. But you can't actually take away people's pursuit of self-interest. Is baked into your biological makeup. And there goes Leo. But I mean, this would be where I'd sort of punctuate this, is to say, what you shouldn't do is be stupid about it. But on that note, I have to duck. My trusty associate has departed the scene. Good night and good luck. Whoop, wait, hold on. There we go.